Infamy, being well known for a negative quality or action. Many things live in infamy. The release of Father of All, the entire year of 2020, Pete Wentz's pick, Pearl Harbor, John Mulaney's current career, that weird DM Julian Casablancas sent to that random girl that one time. These very seriously important cultural events live on in our memory, but to me, there's one that's extra important. I grew up in a particular time, the 2000s, a time where a certain sound was dominating the airwaves of young people like me. Panic at the Disco, Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, Sleeping with Sirens, Pierce the Veil. Pop punk and emo were thriving. But by the late 2000s and particularly the early 2010s, things were changing. Pop punk and its connected genres were just dying. Out the door! Tastes were changing and the melodramatic feelings attached to those genres must have just been falling out of fashion. Or was there something going on beneath the surface, slowly killing mainstream punk from the inside? Something that had been brewing since 2001. In all likelihood, it was just going out of fashion, but let me tell my dramatic story, okay? An independent record label called Fearless Records, specializing in punk subgenres such as pop punk, metalcore, and emo, was unknowingly crafting what would become the horsemen of punk's apocalypse. More specifically, there were 7 harbingers of mainstream punk's apocalypse. And these harbingers had a name. They are... After my last video where I went into the do's and don'ts about making cover songs, I knew that I was going to have to tackle this behemoth at some point. I purposely didn't go over any Punk Goes Pop covers in that video because I know that this is such a monolith in mainstream punk culture that it deserves its own video and a lot more analysis. When I started this project, I assumed that I was going to be in for tons of bad music to laugh at and pick apart, but I ended up being met with a fate so much worse. In preparation, I had to listen to all of the covers on all 7 albums. In numbers, that's over 98 covers to listen to, plus the original so that I can correctly compare them. In time, that's over 12 fucking hours of listening to shitty covers and old ass pop songs. Now, what would have made that fun is if they were all so bad that they were funny and I would have a lot to talk about in regards to that. Instead, I was met with hours of mind-numbing, nothing sandwiches of music made for the sole purpose of selling compilation albums to pop punk and emo fans who don't understand that what they're listening to is purely manufactured fucking garbage. For the sake of brevity, I'm not going to go over all 98 of the covers. If I did that, we would end up being here for like a day. Instead, I'm going to rank the albums from what I believe to be worst to best, give my general thoughts on each volume, share the 2 worst covers from each one, and I might sprinkle in some other covers if I just have something to say about them or want to share some extra info. After all that, I'll go back and pick the 7 worst covers from all 98 and rank them accordingly. And those 7 tracks will be the 7 true harbingers of mainstream punk's apocalypse. Now, come with me and I will walk you through the torture device that was the Punk Goes Pop series.
Wait!
Did you guys hear that? It sounded like a scream coming from my kitchen. I guess I need to go check out what that was. Whoa, holy shit.
Wait, Michael, don't do it. I'm you from the future. Don't listen to the entire Punk Goes Pop series. It infects your mind and makes you throw out every piece of punk music that you own and write them off forever.
Oh man, I already listened to him. This is a bit being filmed after I already researched and scripted the whole thing.
No, I'm too late. It's already been set in motion.
Well, in that case, I'm actually going to take these Jeff Rosenstock albums back with me to the future so they don't get broken. Bye. Wow. Man, the copy of Worry was really expensive. Fuck. Well, now that you know where my mental health is right about now, let's get on with the review. Welcome to the third filming location of this video. Behind me is a chart where I'm going to physically place the albums as I rank them. As you can see, each one is labeled with an expression of how I felt when I listened to them, ranging from dead to mildly interested. So before I actually get started talking about any music, I just want to have the necessary disclaimer that I don't have anything against any of these artists or against Fearless Records in general. I am a fan of most of the genres that we're going to talk about, and I'm even a fan of some of the artists that we're going to talk about, but I think this series represents a really just commodification of music that lacks integrity and artistry and is made solely just to sell compilation albums. So taking a look under the hood at a lot of these songs and looking at why they don't work and how bad they are, I think is just my way of critiquing this and showing that, things that are manufactured in this way don't typically end up making good art. They just end up making filler. It's also my opinion, so if you don't agree with me, it doesn't matter. I'm just here to entertain you, and hopefully you agree with me, but if you don't, don't say something shitty in the comments. The very worst Punk Goes Pop volume is Volume 5. Volume 5, released in 2012, is also coincidentally one of the most commercially successful. It debuted at number 16 on the Billboard 200s when it came out. So I listened to these in reverse order. So I started with 7 and went all the way down to 1. And I did 7, 6, and 5 all in one sitting. So needless to say, when I got to Volume 5, I was pretty fucking cooked. Volume 5 is the worst one because it had the most amount of tracks on it that I thought were truly horrible at 5, and only had 2 other covers that I thought were even worth talking about at all. From those 5 actively bad covers, I had to whittle it down to just 2. So here are those 2. First up is Upon the Dawning's cover of Call Me Maybe by Carly Rae Jepsen. This cover is actually a really interesting place to start because a lot of what makes the covers we're going to talk about later bad is the just horrible implementation of punk, emo, or metalcore elements into the original songs. They almost all manage to simultaneously do too much and too little, leading to these really odd sounding instrumental fusions from not doing enough, while also having these over-the-top ridiculous performances from wanting to do so much just to differentiate itself. When I was listening to this, I physically reeled back in my desk chair when the poorly remade strings, strange trap-esque drum machine, and weird vocals gave way to the most just disgusting and displeasing screams I've ever heard in this style. I understand and even feel the appeal of screaming and growls in metalcore music, but this is horrible representation of that skill. You can also tell that Upon the Dawning wanted to make this cover sound edgy and dark because the screamed parts add a couple fucks into the lyric for no reason. To make things even worse, those poorly remade strings come back later in the track, but now they're flanked by these frankly disgustingly distorted guitars, needlessly syncopated drums, and just bad singing. Even if the entire song didn't sound like shit, the breakdown at around the 2:30 mark in the song is so stomach-churningly bad with these weird electronic effects and more horrible screaming. My girlfriend hid her face in shock when I played the song from her, and she refused to listen to any more of the songs with me after that. You can't even have a partner go through this grueling journey with you. You must be alone. The other worst cover from Volume 5 has to be Breathe Carolina's cover of Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. I will die on the mountain of my opinion that emotronic is one of the worst things to ever happen to modern society, let alone just punk culture. If I ever have to listen to anything that brings up memories of blood on the dance floor ever again, it'll be too fucking soon. I'm still haunted by those times. This track is slowly killed by just 1,000 little paper cuts. That iconic bass line is played with absolutely no style, and the synth line sounds like a bass preset on a $60 Yamaha keyboard. The auto-tune voiced sounds bad. The synth holds in the pre-chorus literally just sound like white noise. And the chorus, holy fuck the chorus. Dude, you have this whiny, auto-tuned pop-punk voice over this wannabe techno beat that does nowhere near close enough to sound unique or glitchy. Genuinely, this track sounds like it could have been made as a prank. If it had been so bad that it was funny, that would have been one thing, but this track in particular was genuinely insufferable. It was the weirdest mix of football stadium hype background techno and bottom of the barrel substanceless pop punk that I think I've ever heard. We're gonna find some so bad that they're funny examples later on, but this was not one of them. Not by a long shot. Even though those two covers were truly horrific, on top of the other ones that I just didn't even choose to talk about, there were a couple of covers on this album that I think are worth saying something about. Mayday Parade and Vic Fuentes' cover of Somebody That I Used to Know is probably the only cover out of all 98 that I think is more than just fine. Really, it just sounds like a normal Mayday Parade song, and it's not overly heavy for no reason, so it sounds pretty good. Issues' cover of Boyfriend by Justin Bieber is modern art. There's truly nothing else in the world that gives you the same feeling as when you hear the lyrics swag, swag, swag on you, chillin' by the fire while we're eating fondue.
Oh, yeah.
The second worst Punk Goes Pop volume is Volume 6. Whoa, did the angle wildly change? No, you're crazy, the video always looked like this. Released in 2014, it was the third most commercially successful, debuting at number 19 on the Billboard 200. Probably this album's worst sin is that the lows aren't as horrifically low as they were on Volume 5, but it's just so boring. There are 4 notably bad covers on this one, and only 2 that I thought were worth talking about otherwise. The rest of them were genuinely just noise. This was only the second one that I listened to, so I was still pretty fresh going into it, but the boredom that I left with just fueled my sorrow for the next 5. First up from this volume is Set It Off's cover of Problem by Ariana Grande featuring Iggy Azalea. The whole thing starts off with this big thump of diarrhea bass, what I'm pretty sure is supposed to be a parody of a producer tag or a hype line, and these annoying vocals that I think are trying to sound flirty, but they really just sound like a high school drama kid. All of that happens in just the first 30 seconds of the track. The thing that really kills this one is its lack of identity. It can't choose a sound and stick to it, and every single one of the ones it tries just doesn't work. That pop rock opening doesn't work, then it transitions into a heavier rock feel with harder guitars and drums that sound really stilted in this rhythm, and then there's a fucking ska section in the middle of it that adds a peppy little rhythm and horns. What the fuck? That transitions into some weird nu metal rap rock style for Iggy's verse. The end is a huge garbled mess of all of those. Listening to this will give you so much whiplash, you might as well skip all those steps and just slam your head into your desk. This next one is so astoundingly mind-blowing at how anyone thought that this combination of genre and song was ever gonna work. R&B with a rap feature turned into brutal metalcore? Bruh. They really shouldn't have, but Ocean's 8 Alaska have done a cover of Beyonce and Jay-Z's Drunken Love. Without the iconic background vocal sample from Drunken Love that makes its way into this cover, you could show this song to someone and try to have them guess what they're listening to, and they would never in a million years be able to get it right. The growled vocals here have no definition or enunciation at all, so all of the words get lost. The music is mostly a wall of distorted guitars and blast beats, so you're not really getting much of that either. At that point, you might as well just be doing an original song. The interpretations of the chorus and the Jay-Z feature don't get any better. I can't stand this group's singer's
Whiny little voice.
and he delivers every line with the swagger of an 11-year-old. Lastly, this song has a hilariously slow breakdown that drops the BPM to such a crawl that instead of that good heaviness that you want with slow breakdowns, it just ends up feeling super empty and really boring. The honorable mentions for this volume aren't going to take very long because they were barely even worth bringing up in the first place. If you were to close your eyes and listen to Youth in Revolt's cover of Royals by Lorde, it just sounds like Lorde trying to do a satirical impression of a pop punk singer. Knucklepuck's cover of Chocolate by the 1975 is fine. It's like if Matty Healy was American and he also just didn't really care about what he was singing about.
Oh, gay.
The third worst Punk Goes Pop volume is Volume 3. Maybe I should have put thumbtacks on all four corners instead of just the top and the bottom. If you're my landlord and you're watching this, these are prop tacks. They're not actually in the wall. This one was released in 2010 and it was the fourth most commercially successful, debuting at number 26 on the Billboard 200. Here is where I started to see the Punk Goes Pop formula really be solidified with a large amount of metalcore covers and other subgenres sprinkled in. This volume also has 4 tracks that I thought were notably bad, and only 2 other covers that I thought were okay or worth talking about. Really, the only reason that it's above 6 is just because it was less actively boring. Don't get me wrong, it still wasn't any good, I just wasn't half asleep while going through it. I think I could maybe see the light at the end of the tunnel while listening to this one because it was the start of my last listening section, and that might have swayed me. I don't know. Either way, there's still 2 bad covers we gotta talk about. First is Asking Alexandria's cover of Right Now by Akon. This and the cover of Heartless, also from this volume, are really weird choices for covers, but I thought that this one was a worse offender. I would say that Akon's original isn't really a good song, but it does have an iconic synth line. Asking Alexandria tried to recreate that synth line, but they somehow made it sound like it was recorded through an earbud microphone and on a keyboard they bought on Temu. It's really bad. Now, take that bad synth line and make it clearly audible in the background behind intense metalcore and loud screams. This is one of those that's so bad that it's funny. It kind of sounds like the audio engineer working on the song accidentally overlaid the 2 tracks at once and thought it was really funny, so decided to keep it in as a fun little prank. They aren't properly blended at all, and they sound so out of place next to each other. It's gotta be one of the laziest examples of poor incorporation of an iconic sound into one of these covers. With that horrible synth line in the background, my mind automatically pictures some kind of millennial youth pastor trying to hype up the kids in the congregation by making a bad cover of Right Now by Akon. The vocals are super nasally and don't have a unique sound to them, so they sound extra bland when paired with the already bland and poorly made music. It's one of the few covers from this video I'm actually going to recommend that you listen to, because you really have to hear it to believe it. This next one is also one of the covers that I thought was so bad that it's funny. It's We Came as Romans cover of My Love by Justin Timberlake featuring T.I. It's mostly funny just because of the terrible Justin Timberlake impression that the singer is doing. They are really trying their best to have the inflection, looseness, and swagger of JT's voice, but it sounds so bad. It's like drunk guy at a karaoke bar bad. During the verses, this track is basically a very faithful recreation of the original, with a honestly pretty okay recreation of the song's iconic beat, just with that terrible impression over the top of it. But because we're on a Punk Goes Pop album, the end of each verse has to end with an intense breakdown and screams. But I actually think this group's screamer is pretty good. He maintains a high level of intensity while still being able to clearly understand what he's saying. Unfortunately, that doesn't matter much because this track does the same thing that the previous one does, where the original iconic elements from this song's beat are just clearly audible in the background behind all the metalcore stuff. Because the recreated beat isn't horrible and the general music on this one isn't super insufferable either, it's not death-inducing like the last one, it mostly just sounds silly and very wrong. None of the other tracks on this volume were noteworthy for anything funny or interesting. There were just a couple that I thought were fine. Not bad, not good, they're just listenable. Artists vs. Poets cover of Bad Romance by Lady Gaga is fine. Mayday Parade's cover of My Head by Jason Derulo is fine. It's another one that just sounds like a Mayday Parade song, so it couldn't be that bad.
Oh, gay.
Hey, I forgot to film me throwing the number on the board for this section, so just pretend that you don't see it for a second. The Punk Goes Pop volume that falls right in the middle for me is Punk Goes Pop Volume 2. Released in 2009, this one was the most commercially successful out of all of them. It debuted at number 15 on the Billboard 200. Mainstream punk was in its last real glory days at this point, so I can imagine that the hype for this was pretty massive. Volume 2 came out 8 years after the first one, so I don't think they had really established their formula yet about what genres they were going to do and what bands they were going to include. I think that both helps and hurts this one. It tries to do a lot more variation and pull from a lot more influences, which some of the later volumes could have really used, but I'm not sure if the musical talent was really there yet. The entire volume came off kind of sloppy and mishandled to me, but it was actively way less boring than the previous ones. This one only had 3 covers that I actively really disliked, but it also had 3 that I thought were worth talking about otherwise. I really wanted to include There for Tomorrow's cover of Icebox by Omarion because it's never a good idea when white guys try and cover an R&B song, but unfortunately this volume is plagued by 2 truly inescapable and maddening emotronic covers. No, don't make me talk about emotronic again, no, make it stop, no, it's you. You're the one making me do this. You're the one putting me through this. I don't want to do it. Let me go. Please let me go. Sorry about that. The first cover I want to talk about is Breathe Carolina's cover of See You Again by Miley Cyrus. The only band to make it on the list twice, by the way. Yes, you heard that correctly. There is a cover of an old Hannah Montana era Miley Cyrus song on this volume. I'm personally really nostalgic for that era of pop music, so I actually really like the original song. This cover, however, is possibly the driest, flattest, and worst sounding cover out of all 98. Every musical element of this cover is ugly and bad. For like half the song, the vocals are barely audible because they're put through this whisper effect, but they're also layered with so many heavy effects and seemingly recorded at a normal volume and then turned down that I'm sure that they would sound like shit turned up anyways. I'm proven correct because once they come up to a normal volume, they somehow sound worse. This is seriously 2008 YouTube video level of audio processing. A Newgrounds video with 20 views can have this song in it and no one would question it. The actual music feels so empty and lifeless. Like 80% of the audio in this track is a repeating, piercingly ugly synth line, an absolutely farting bass thump, and the most boring bare bones drum pattern you can imagine. Everything is mixed a little too quietly and a little too close together, so all of those sounds somehow feel tiny and fill up no space. Truly, tragically horrific. This next track has basically the same critique. It's Attack Attack's cover of I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry. In fact, they're so similar, I'm not sure if I would be able to tell them apart if I didn't already know that it was 2 different groups. Another gross emotronic song that would fit right over a 240p compilation of sick Dragon Ball Z clips or something. They do have at least a couple of differences I can point out. The mix is a lot louder and a lot more full on this one, but it turns out to be a double-edged sword, because now you can clearly hear how much of an assault on the ears it is. The super high and piercing synth line mixed with the really loud effects on the voice are almost as deafening and screeching as the Sky Sanctuary melody from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. The instrumental is genuinely so mind-numbing that it could be in the background of a C movie set in a 2010 nightclub and not a single viewer would be able to remember one note. This cover actually has a little more relation to other tracks on this volume with its emo breakdown at the end, but it's so uninspired and boring that it might as well be what an AI would spit out when you feed it 50 emo breakdowns. God, finally done talking about emotronic covers. There's no more. Those were the last 2 ones. There's no more. Time to get less angry and talk about covers that I thought were actually interesting for a change. Silverstein's cover of Apologize by One Republic doesn't stick to the original production choices, so leaves out more of the electronic and lighter hits of instrumentation, which makes it not sound as bad when it's changed into a heavier setting. August Burns Red's cover of Baby One More Time by Britney Spears doesn't sound really horrible or anything, but the lyrics in this style are just hilariously funny. Bayside's cover of Beautiful Girls by Sean Kingston was one of the ones going into this I thought was going to be at the very bottom, but surprisingly, it was okay.
Oh, yeah.
The third best Punk Goes Pop volume is Volume 4. Released in 2011, this one was mildly successful, peaking at number 92 on the Billboard 200. Volume 4 is kind of unique in its composition when compared to the other volumes because there were only 2 tracks here that I thought were outstandingly horrible, but there were also only 2 other tracks that I thought were worth mentioning at all. That is a huge chunk of this album that to me just sounded like white noise. Nothing is particularly bad or too offensive, but I think that's why it lands in this position because it was so inoffensive and boring. The lows are low, sure, but it wasn't too particularly painful. The Ready Set and Mod Sun's cover of Roll Up by Wiz Khalifa is genuinely hard to listen to without cringing while listening to these white guys try and keep up their pop punk style while having any amount of flow and charisma over these admittedly kind of silly lyrics.
I'm from Brooklyn, that's alright.
The original song certainly isn't a masterpiece or anything, but this is like when your teacher made you write a rap about a book that you read as a project, and you have about as much talent as the desk chair that you sit in. Mod Sun's black scent on his verse is off the charts, while simultaneously sounding like the blow up and act like I don't know nobody guy.
My main goal is to blow up.
This one performance honestly might have been the inspiration that Machine Gun Kelly needed to write Mod Sun's character in that movie that he made. I didn't even bother to mention it, but the instrumental here is a flat and lifeless recreation of the original. Like I said earlier, Wiz Khalifa's original isn't a masterpiece or anything, so the fact that the music here sounds worse than the original should really say something. Next is Chunk, no, Captain Chunk, the stupidest fucking band name I've ever heard's cover of We Are Who We Are by Kesha. We are who we are. This has to be the worst expression of metalcore I've ever heard. The genre has its merits and has genuinely good bands, but if you needed to show somebody what bad metalcore sounded like, you can pull this up and show it to them. I don't even get to complain about having an unfitting piece of electronic instrumentation that's iconic to the original on this one like I did back in Volume 3, because they drop the iconic line from this song pretty quickly. No. The problems here are purely in the band's performance. This band's screamer fucking sucks. He sounds like he's gargling spit and choking himself with every syllable. It's so forced and unnatural sounding, and those are like the key things that you need to have a good scream. It's especially noticeable when it's layered in the background because it just forms the mix into an absolutely gargled static. It's so ugly and doesn't have any finesse or character at all. The band's singer is also so bad. He sounds ripped straight out of Hollister punk. The kind of sound that department stores developed so they could capitalize on pop punk's popularity in the 2000s without having to play inappropriate music to children. This guy could straight up be a member of a made-up boy band for a Nickelodeon show. His voice would work, I guess, over some bland pop punk, but it's especially unfitting with all the metalcore elements around it. It's like an emo walked into a biker bar and thought he would fit in just because he's also wearing a leather jacket. Now, luckily, this volume did have 2 covers that I thought were genuinely interesting. Pierce the Veil's cover of Just the Way You Are by Bruno Mars is pretty okay. Actually, every cover of theirs or featuring members from their group on all the volumes are pretty okay. It's almost like they're a talented musical group. Go Radio's cover of Rolling in the Deep by Adele is almost passable, but I can't get it out of my head that the singer for Go Deep sounds like he was destined to be a country star, but he just forced himself into singing punk music. I believe that's what the kids these days would call y'alternative.
Oh, yeah.
The second best Punk Goes Pop volume is Volume 7. So I just realized I'm not really sure what I'm going to do about putting number 1 up there. I think I might just stick it to the wall. Again, if you're my landlord, this is not real. This is all special effects, so you don't need to come see it. Released in 2017, Volume 7 is the most recent one, and it debuted at number 79 on the Billboard 200. I am very happy to say that the volumes did not just get progressively worse over time, even though 5 and 6 were both very bad. Volume 7 was the very first one I listened to in this entire process, and I was genuinely surprised at how not 100% abysmal everything was. My picks for the 2 worst covers from this volume are nowhere near as bad as some of the other ones. although they are still pretty bad, and it did have one of the few covers that I thought was actually okay. Most of it was still pretty nothing, but it was mostly inoffensive. But we do need to get into the 2 tracks that still managed to piss me off. A band I already knew I didn't like, this is Dance Gavin Dance's cover of That's What I Like by Bruno Mars. I've personally never really understood the appeal of Dance Gavin Dance, and I'm sure as shit not getting it here. Every time one of these groups goes for R&B or rap, it just doesn't work, man. Dance Gavin Dance might as well be calling themselves Go White Boy Go on this one. There's this hint of math rockiness in the guitar work on this cover that doesn't really fit at all, so it sounds like the band doesn't have any chemistry. It's not performed poorly, I suppose, it's more like a giant compositional error that makes the entire cover fall flat on its face. This cover is also just another example of these bands not picking songs that will translate into punk very well. The lyrics and flow of this song sound really stupid over this vocal and instrumental style. The vocalist is simultaneously doing this slight Bruno Mars impression on some lines while doing these huge embellishments with screams on others, and it really confuses the tone. It kind of sounds like Dance Gavin Dance treated this as a joke and tried to make the entire thing sound as ridiculous as possible. With a very odd inclusion is Capsize's cover of Fake Love by Drake. I was kind of confused as to why Capsize are even on this project because they're a really small group that I doubt a lot of people have even heard of. I think that's why this is the only cover in the entire volume where the production quality sounds really bad. The vocals are really roughly recorded and the entire mix is squashed together and crunched for no reason. It doesn't sound like an artistic choice to my ears, so it makes the whole thing sound really amateurish. I don't want to be too harsh on what seems to be a small band, but the performances here aren't very good either. The vocals are really messy and loose. The singer can't really get his words very well enunciated while he's going for these bigger notes, almost like he's got to open his mouth and his vocal tract as wide as possible to get the pitch and the tone that he needs. There's also just a clear lack of control in the voice. Those two weren't too stomach churning, and there were luckily 2 listenable covers on this one as well. Closer by the Chainsmokers is a horrible song, so the fact that Seaway's cover of it sounds okay is pretty remarkable. The Plot and Use cover of Let It Go by James Bay, not the Disney song, is fine. It's an incredibly faithful cover of a song that I already think is just fine, so if you like The Plot and You, you'll probably think it's good.
Oh, gay.
And finally, the least bad Punk Goes Pop volume is Volume 1! Man, what a fucking slog we've been through. We're finally to the best, or I guess really the least bad volume in the whole series. To be fair, by process of elimination, you probably already knew this was coming. Released all the way back in 2001, this volume didn't chart at all, which isn't really surprising because I doubt there was any hype or even really knowledge that this was happening. This volume is kind of hard to talk about in comparison with the others, just because of how different it is. Metalcore and emo weren't super established in 2001 yet, so basically every cover on this volume is a clear-cut 90s pop punk song. Also, there are no big names on it at all. It's completely comprised of small bands that were signed to Fearless at the time. It really does feel like an experiment Fearless was trying to do just to see what would happen, so it feels a lot less forced and a lot less fan servicey than the later ones.
Hooray!
That all being said though, it's definitely still not good. The thing is, the covers aren't really bad in the same way. Here, the big problem is that they're mostly just crazy bland and boring because all the pop punk covers lack any of the interesting and crazy elements of emo or metalcore. The bands are also way less polished and creative, so the music is a lot sloppier and a lot worse produced. But without further ado, let's get into our final batch of covers.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Stretch Armstrong, great band names, cover of Get This Party Started by Pink. This cover was the only one in this volume that related to any of the others really, with this proto-screamo scream going on throughout most of it, but unfortunately that is kind of the thing that made this track horrific. It might have just been a limitation in the recording quality, but the screamed line in the chorus is just screeching and absolutely drowns out every single part of the song. It's not particularly well performed either. It doesn't sound like the guy is really using any proper technique to achieve that sound. It just sounds like he's fucking shredding his vocal cords and yelling as loud as he can. Cameo from my beautiful girlfriend.
Why did you say that in the little dog voice?
This is my mulch-pilled loam maxing girlfriend.
We interrupted this music review to bring you a crazy Sephora.
Clinique Moisture Surge. It was 50% off.
Whoa.
Michael has really dry skin, so that's why I got it.
Damn. Ooh, pretty. Oh, why'd you want that one?
It's so thick.
It's gonna make the mic so slippery.
No, it sinks in really fast. I put some right. Well, you can't feel it now, but I put some on right before I got home, and my hands aren't.
Huh?
Here you go.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
He's just throughout the whole thing. It's really hard to listen to and just kind of makes my throat hurt thinking about it. Outside of that vocal, this track is plagued by this ugly and sludgy leading guitar tone. It's super deep and chuggy, clashing really hard with the vocals and the lyrics of the song. The singer and the other instruments are giving a kind of the Offsprings vibe here, but that guitar tone just throws everything off and makes the entire thing sound very confused. Our last bad cover is Knockout's cover of Survivor by Destiny's Child. The original offender of trying to turn R&B songs into pop punk songs and failing miserably. Here though, it's less about the implementation and more about the performance. These guys cannot keep pace with the tempo that they've set on this track. Everything feels like it's constantly dragging behind just a bit, and they're always trying to pull forward just to keep up. The poor singer really gets it the worst. It's genuinely painful to hear him try to squeeze every single word of this pretty complicated set of lyrics into the tiny window that he's given himself. That in turn makes the quality of the vocals slip a ton.
Damn, bro, you can't remember a single thing you wrote down.
No. The words all get garbled and slurred together, and pitch basically becomes a non-factor as he's essentially just talking the lyrics to you at some point. Lastly, this cover also suffers from an ugly, sludgy leading guitar tone. This time it's leaning a lot more into nu metal or Skillet territory, but it's equally as disgusting. It would fit perfectly in a compilation video showing off the coolest bikes at Sturgis though. To finally wrap up this tragically long recap of every cover worth noting out of these 98, we have two interesting inclusions from Volume 1. Slick Shoes' cover of Candy by Mandy Moore is honestly a pretty fun little pop punk song. It's not great, but I wouldn't immediately notice that anything was wrong with it. Reach the Sky's cover of Sometimes by Britney Spears is an okay hardcore song. It's nothing special again, but at least the transition into punk isn't done horribly.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, the rankings are in. The official non-subjective ranking for the Punk Goes Pop series is 5, 6, 3, 2, 4, 7, and 1. However, I would still say that none of them are worth listening to in full for any reason other than for fun. There are a few songs that I think are genuinely worth listening to, but when there's 98 in total, that's just not enough. We still need to do one more thing though. We need to find out what the 7 worst of those 14 bad covers that I mentioned are. If you remember what I said about 30 minutes ago, we need to find what the 7 true harbingers of mainstream punk's apocalypse are. More specifically, there were 7 harbingers of mainstream punk's apocalypse. That's what all of this was for, to find out who took down our beloved emo and pop punk culture. In my opinion, the 7 worst covers from the entire Punk Goes Pop franchise are: number 7, the Ready Set's cover of Pull Up by Wiz Khalifa. It's more embarrassing and cringe than it is a truly horrific piece of music. It could make a good hate listen, but it doesn't make me actively as upset as some of the others. Number 6, Set It Off's cover of Problem by Ariana Grande and Iggy Azalea. This has the embarrassing performance qualities as the last one, but with the addition of truly bad musical ideas on top of it. The lack of cohesion and confusing tone makes it a very difficult and jarring listen, so you can't even hate listen to it because of how just hard it is to hear. Number 5, Breathe Carolina's cover of See You Again by Miley Cyrus. You probably knew all of the emotronic covers were gonna fall here, and this is no exception. It's childish, amateur, lame, and sounds like something a novice producer could throw together in a couple of days. It's bottom floor footnote dance music that you would see on a 5-year-old Spotify Wrapped. Number 4 is Chunk, no, Captain Chunk's cover of We Are Who We Are by Kesha. This is the first one in the list that makes me actively upset when I think about it. Just in terms of musical ability and display of the genre, this is the worst metalcore cover of the entire series. The screamer sounds like your weird uncle who smokes too much, and the singer really should have been singing department store pop punk. It's such a bad expression of a good art form that it makes me genuinely feel bad for metalcore fans. Number 3 is Attack Attack's cover of I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry. This track is an absolute assault on the ears that made me physically recoil and turn the volume down when I heard it. It's the less funny, less nostalgic cousin of Nightcore that the weird guy in your high school class with ugly fringe bangs and a katana collection would play out loud on his phone in class to try to provoke you into a conversation about how eclectic and different he is. It's piercing, ugly, and damaging to my psyche. Number 2 is Upon This Dawning's cover of Call Me Maybe by Carly Rae Jepsen. This was the first cover I came across in my listening that genuinely made me feel like I was enduring a new form of torture rather than listening to funny, bad relics from the past. It's from the worst volume, and it's the worst example of trying to inject edge and darkness into a song and ending up sounding so horribly lame and stupid that it's difficult to listen to. This is my dark and twisted version of Call Me Maybe. Yeah, it says fuck in it. One look into my mind would make most people simply go insane. Get a job, bro. Number 1, the very worst cover of all 98 is Breathe Carolina's cover of Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. This is the absolute This is the absolute worst display of poorly made music and a dumb idea coming together to form something so bad that you can't even enjoy it in a joking way. Every part of the instrumental sounds wrong and sounds cheap. The singing is so uninspired and soaked in inartistic and tasteless autotune. It sounds like a joke song made up on a whim and played to try to spark outrage because of its poor quality and bad idea. It was the least fun I had in the entire experience, and that should tell you something with how crazed I probably look right now. Well, I think I'm done engaging with any of these covers for the rest of my life. It's time for me to move on, and it's time for you to move on to another video. Remember, this is all my subjective opinion, and be sure to leave your own feelings on the Punk Goes Pop series in the comments. Also, let me know what I should cover next. Another poorly aged music compilation? A specific artist? Who knows? Thanks for watching. I've got to go get my copy of Worry back for my future self. See you next time, and keep on digging.